15 years ago, Ethan Cole was a broke single father who stopped in the rain for a homeless little girl no one else seemed to see. Now he was sitting in an Atlanta courtroom seconds away from losing a freight empire worth nearly $1 billion. His enemies had turned the kindest decision of his life into evidence against him. Outside rain slid down the courthouse windows. Inside, Ethan sat with scarred mechanic's hands folded beneath the table while a judge prepared to strip away everything he had built. Then the courtroom doors opened, and the girl he once gave a home to walked in carrying a leather case that could change everything. This is more than a story about money or betrayal. It is about what happens when a promise survives longer than fear. Stay to the end. Like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. 15 years before Sophie Cole walked into that Atlanta courtroom carrying a leather case, Ethan Cole was not the kind of man anyone photographed. He was the kind of man people looked past. At 33, Ethan spent most of his waking hours beneath the raised hood of somebody else's truck at the port of Savannah, his shoulders bent over diesel engines while cargo cranes moved against the Georgia sky like enormous steel birds. By the time his shift ended, that Thursday night engine oil had worked beneath his fingernails and rain had begun tapping the corrugated roof above the maintenance bay. His supervisor leaned through the doorway. "You heading out, Cole?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "Soon as I finish this fuel line. You're already 2 hours over." "I know. You got a kid waiting." That made Ethan glance at the clock. 9:18. He muttered something under his breath and reached for his phone. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Noah. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second before calling back. His son answered on the second ring. "You forgot again." "I didn't forget." "Then what do you call it?" Ethan looked at the truck in front of him. Bad timing. Noah was 11 and had already developed the irritating ability to recognize when his father was avoiding the truth. "Mrs. Parker left dinner in the fridge. I'll heat it up." "She said you would say that." Ethan smiled despite himself. Their neighbor, Mrs. Parker, had been checking on Noah since Rachel died. Ethan still hated needing the help. "Did you finish your math?" "Mostly." "Mostly isn't finished." "Neither is your shift." Ethan leaned against the workbench. For a moment he could hear television noise in the background of their little rental house. He pictured Noah sitting cross-legged on the couch, probably wearing the faded Atlanta Braves shirt he refused to throw away. "I'll be home soon." There was a pause. Then Noah asked the question more softly. "Before I fall asleep." Ethan stared out through the open bay door. Rain swept across the concrete yard beneath the lights. "I'm trying. You said that yesterday." The words landed harder than Noah intended. Ethan looked down at the grease on his hand. "I know." Another silence. Then Noah said, "Just come home, Dad." "I will." Ethan ended the call and stood there for a few seconds. 2 years earlier, Rachel would have been the one telling him to stop working. She would have called the maintenance office and demanded that somebody drag him out by his collar if necessary. Rachel had possessed the kind of laughter that made ordinary rooms feel smaller after it disappeared. Cancer had taken her in 8 months. 8 months from the first doctor's appointment to a hospital room with the curtains open toward a parking garage. Ethan had spent the 2 years since then doing what he knew how to do. Working, fixing, paying, moving. Anything that kept him from sitting still long enough to notice what was missing. He tightened the last connection on the fuel line, signed the worksheet, and pulled on his old canvas jacket. By the time he reached the street, the storm had become serious. Savannah rain could arrive with theatrical confidence, warm 1 minute, violent the next. Water rushed along the curb, streetlights blurred against the wet pavement. Ethan climbed into his aging pickup and turned the key. Nothing. He tried again. The starter clicked. He stared at the dashboard. "You have got to be kidding me." A diesel mechanic stranded by his own truck. Rachel would have enjoyed that. He almost heard her laugh. Ethan opened the hood, stood in the rain for 5 useless minutes, then accepted that the starter had finally died. The bus station was a little over half a mile away. From there he could get close enough to home to walk the rest. He called Mrs. Parker. "I'm having truck trouble." "Of course you are. I'll be late." "I already put Noah to bed." Ethan's jaw tightened. Was he upset? He's 11, Ethan. He's always upset about something. He knew she was trying to make him feel better. It did not work. Thank you. Get home safe. He started walking. Rain soaked through his jacket before he reached the second intersection. By the time the old bus terminal came into view, his jeans were heavy with water and his boots made a wet sound with every step. The terminal sat beneath flickering lights beside a row of dark storefronts. A few travelers hurried through the entrance. A cab pulled away. Someone laughed beneath an umbrella. Ethan almost walked past. Then he saw the shoes. Small sneakers beneath the edge of a damaged awning. One toe had split open. The sock inside was dark with rainwater. Ethan slowed. A girl was sitting against the brick wall. Maybe 9, maybe 10. It was hard to tell. She had both knees pulled against her chest and both arms locked around a torn purple backpack. Her hair hung wet against her cheeks. She wore a sweatshirt several sizes too large. No coat, no adult nearby. Ethan stopped beneath a streetlight. The girl immediately looked at him, not with curiosity, with calculation. Her eyes moved from his face to his hands, then toward the street, then toward the station entrance. She was measuring exits. That unsettled him more than the fact that she was alone. A child her age should not know how to measure exits. Ethan stayed where he was. "You waiting for somebody?" No answer. He took one step closer. The girl's fingers tightened around her backpack. Ethan stopped again. "Okay." He lifted both hands slightly. "I'll stay here." Rain drummed against the metal awning. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Ethan noticed a convenience store across the street. He pointed toward it. "I'm going to get something warm." Still no answer. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." The girl watched him walk away. Inside the store, Ethan bought 2 cups of hot chocolate, a packet of socks, and a cheap yellow rain jacket from a rack near the register. The cashier looked through the window. "That kid been out there long." "You saw her. Maybe an hour. And you didn't call anybody." The cashier frowned. "Man, I don't know people's business." Ethan looked at him. "She's 9. Maybe somebody's coming." Ethan paid without answering. Back beneath the awning, he set one hot chocolate on the ground several feet from the girl, then the socks, then the jacket. She stared at them. "You can take them. What did you put in it?" Her voice was barely louder than the rain. Ethan looked at the cup. "Nothing." "How do I know?" He considered that. "You don't." She looked suspicious. Ethan sat down against the opposite side of the entrance, leaving plenty of distance between them. He lifted his own cup. "So I'll drink mine." He took a slow sip. Same machine. She did not move. He took another. After nearly a minute, she reached for the other cup. She held it beneath her nose first, then took the smallest sip possible. Ethan looked away to give her privacy. After a few minutes, he asked, "What's your name?" The girl stared into the cup. "Sophie." "I'm Ethan." "Nothing." "Do you know where your mom is, Sophie?" Her face changed, just slightly. Ethan immediately regretted the question. "No." "Your dad?" She looked toward the street. "No." "Is somebody supposed to pick you up?" "No." Every answer sounded like a door closing. Ethan reached into his pocket for his phone. Sophie noticed. "What are you doing?" "Calling the police." She stood so fast the drink nearly spilled. "No. I'm not calling because you're in trouble. No police." "Sophie." She grabbed her backpack. Ethan stayed seated. "Listen to me." Her body was ready to run. "I'm not taking you anywhere." She watched him. "I'm not putting you in my truck. My truck doesn't even work right now." That almost changed her expression. Almost. "I'm calling because you're a kid sitting outside a bus station in a storm." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Her jaw set. Ethan lowered his voice. "But you don't have to trust me." He placed the phone on the wet pavement between them. "You can watch me call." She did. He called the Savannah Police Department and explained the situation. He asked specifically for someone trained to deal with a minor and requested that Child Protective Services be contacted. Then he put the phone down. "They're coming." Sophie sank back against the wall. She looked angry. Ethan understood. Adults had probably made decisions around her for a long time. Maybe every decision sounded like help. Maybe very few had felt like it. He pointed at the yellow jacket. "At least put that on." "I hate yellow." Good, it was the cheapest one. For the first time, something in Sophie's face shifted, not a smile, but close enough that Ethan noticed. She pulled the jacket over her sweatshirt. It swallowed her. The sleeves reached beyond her hands. Ethan looked at it. Perfect fit. She gave him a flat stare. You lie a lot. Only about fashion. That almost smile appeared again. A patrol car arrived 15 minutes later. A female officer stepped out with another woman wearing a county badge. Ethan stood. The social worker introduced herself as Dana Whitaker. She spoke to Sophie first, softly, carefully. Ethan moved away while they talked. He should have left then. Noah was home. He was already late. This was no longer Ethan's responsibility. That was the reasonable conclusion. He walked toward the sidewalk. Wait! Sophie's voice came from behind him. Ethan turned. She stood beside Dana with the yellow sleeves hanging over her hands. Are you coming back? The question was quiet, almost embarrassed. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. He had heard Noah ask nearly the same thing less than an hour earlier. Before that, years ago, Ethan himself had asked it. His own father had been a man of temporary returns. A man who disappeared for weekends, then weeks, then months, always arriving with some explanation nobody believed. At 8 years old, Ethan had waited on porch steps until the sun went down. At 10, he stopped waiting. He looked at Sophie. She was not asking whether he would return to the bus station. Not really. She was asking whether the world contained even one adult whose words lasted longer than a night. Ethan walked back beneath the awning. I don't know where they're taking you. Sophie watched him. But if they'll tell me where you are tomorrow, I'll come see you. You promise. Ethan did not use that word lightly. Not anymore. Yes. Dana studied him for a moment. Then Sophie nodded. It was barely a movement. But it was enough. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived at a pediatric intake center on the south side of Savannah carrying a paper bag from a bakery. He had not known what children Sophie's age liked, so he bought 6 different things. A nurse at the desk looked up. Can I help you? I'm here to see Sophie Reed. The nurse's expression changed slightly. Family, no. Caseworker, no. She studied him more carefully. Ethan reached into his jacket and produced the card Dana had given him. I found her last night. Ms. Whitaker said I could visit. The nurse took the card. You actually came. Ethan frowned. I said I would. She looked at him for another second, then smiled faintly. I'm Claire Bennett. Ethan Cole. I know. Sophie asked 3 times if the mechanic was here yet. Ethan looked toward the hallway. She called me the mechanic. Would you prefer wet stranger? He laughed despite himself. Claire had tired eyes and brown hair pulled back in a loose knot. There was no wedding ring on her hand. He noticed that and immediately felt guilty for noticing. Claire led him to a small recreation room. Sophie sat at a table coloring without much enthusiasm. When she saw Ethan, she froze. He held up the bakery bag. I didn't know what you liked. You came. You sound surprised. I am. He set the bag on the table. That's a little insulting. Sophie looked inside. There are 6. I panicked. Claire leaned against the doorway. Sophie pulled out a cinnamon roll. For 10 quiet minutes, Ethan watched her eat. She did not say thank you. He did not ask her to. Over the following weeks, Ethan kept visiting, at first only because he had promised, then because Sophie started expecting him. Dana eventually explained the history. Sophie's mother had died the previous year. Her father had disappeared long before that. There had been relatives. Then there had not been. There had been temporary homes. One lasted 3 months. Another lasted 6 days. Sophie had learned to keep most of her belongings inside one backpack. Everything she considered important could be carried. Ethan understood the logic. That did not mean he liked it. One evening, Claire found him standing outside Sophie's room after visiting hours. You have a son, right? Yeah. How old? 11. How does he feel about all this? Ethan looked through the small window in the door. I don't know yet. That's probably worth finding out. He glanced at Claire. You always this direct. Only when people look like they need somebody to be. The corner of Ethan's mouth moved. Must be exhausting. It is. The first time Noah met Sophie was 3 months later. By then, Ethan had been approved as a temporary foster placement after a process that felt designed to determine every mistake he had made since birth. His finances were inspected, his house was inspected, his schedule was inspected. Noah was interviewed alone. When the placement was finally approved, Ethan drove Sophie to the small rental house on the west side of Savannah. She carried the purple backpack. Still, Noah stood in the doorway. He had spent the morning pretending he was not nervous. Sophie stopped at the bottom step. Noah looked at Ethan, then at Sophie. "So you're Sophie?" She nodded. "I'm Noah." "I know." He looked offended. "How? Your dad talks about you all the time." Noah glanced at Ethan. "What do you say?" "Nothing embarrassing." Sophie looked at him. "He lies." Ethan sighed. "Great, we're bonding." That evening, Claire joined them for dinner. Nobody called it anything special. Ethan made spaghetti. Noah complained that the sauce was too watery. Claire told him to cook next time. Sophie barely spoke. Then Noah noticed her slide a dinner roll from the basket and hide it inside her sweatshirt pocket. He stared for half a second. Sophie caught him. Her shoulders tightened. Noah said nothing. He simply picked up the basket and pushed it closer to her. "We always have extra." Sophie looked at him, then at Ethan. Ethan kept his eyes on his plate. That night after Sophie went upstairs, Noah found his father washing dishes. "She thinks we're going to run out of food." Ethan rinsed a plate. "I know." "Are we?" Ethan looked at the nearly empty refrigerator. Money was tight enough that the honest answer required thought. "No." Noah nodded. "Okay." The months that followed were not easy. Sophie did not become trusting because someone gave her a bedroom. She slept with her shoes beside the mattress. She hid coins beneath a loose floorboard in the closet. She kept snacks in her backpack. If Ethan raised his voice downstairs, she became silent upstairs. If Claire moved too quickly behind her, Sophie flinched. Nobody mentioned it. Then one evening, Ethan came home 30 minutes later than promised. He found Sophie's bedroom empty. Her backpack was gone. Panic hit him so fast he nearly shouted her name. Noah pointed toward the front door. "Porch." Sophie sat on the steps with the backpack in her lap. Ethan walked outside. "What are you doing? Waiting? For what?" She shrugged. Ethan sat beside her. She moved slightly away. "You said 7. I know. It's 7:30. The truck broke down on Interstate 16. You didn't call. My phone died." Sophie looked toward the street. "That's how it starts." Ethan was quiet. "How what starts? People not coming back?" The words were almost angry. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My father used to disappear." Sophie looked at him. "You had one, technically. Did he come back?" "Sometimes." "How long?" "Sometimes a day, sometimes months." She thought about that. "Did you forgive him?" Ethan looked toward the wet street. "I stopped waiting for him." Sophie stared at him for a long time. Then she asked, "What if you stop coming back?" Ethan answered without looking away. "Then you should be angry. That's it." "No." He turned toward her. "But until that happens, judge me by what I actually do." She looked down at the backpack. After a minute, she unzipped it. Then she carried it back inside. Almost 2 years passed before Ethan petitioned to adopt her. By then, Claire had become part of their strange little household without anyone deciding exactly when it happened. Some mornings, Ethan left coffee outside her apartment before her hospital shift. Some nights, Claire sat at his kitchen table helping Sophie with homework while Noah worked on an old computer he had taken apart and rebuilt twice. Ethan and Claire had gone to dinner exactly 4 times. 2 dinners were interrupted by calls from the children. One ended because Ethan fell asleep in the booth after working 17 hours. Claire still kissed him in the parking lot. A quiet kiss, no fireworks, no promises. Ethan appreciated that. Claire understood that grief did not disappear because affection returned. She never asked Sophie to call her anything, never pushed herself into a role the girl had not offered. One afternoon, Sophie asked her why. "Why, what?" "Why don't you act like you're my mom?" Claire looked up from folding laundry. "Because I'm not." Sophie frowned. "Doesn't that bother you?" "No." What if I never think of you that way? Claire folded another towel. Then I'll survive. Sophie sat on the edge of the couch. Claire looked at her. You don't owe people feelings because they were kind to you. Sophie absorbed that quietly. Months later, during Ethan's final adoption review, a county worker questioned whether he could financially support 2 children. Sophie overheard part of the conversation. That night, Ethan found her backpack beside the front door, again. He stood there staring at it. Then Sophie came downstairs. You don't have to do it. Do what? Adopt me. Ethan looked at her. Where did this come from? They said money is tight. It is. You already have, Noah. I've noticed. You could just tell them no. Ethan walked closer. Sophie folded her arms. You can't afford me. Ethan's expression changed. That is not your decision. Why not? Because you're not a cable bill. She blinked. You're not a truck payment. He pointed toward the backpack. And you're not an expense I cancel when money gets tight. Her eyes became wet. Ethan softened his voice. You're a kid. She looked away. A difficult one. Extremely. That made her laugh through the tears she was trying to hide. Ethan smiled. I've already got one difficult kid. Economically, the second one barely changes anything. From the hallway, Noah shouted, I heard that. Good. The adoption became final on a rainy Tuesday morning in a small Savannah courtroom. No photographers waited outside. No reporters knew Ethan's name. He owned no empire. His checking account had $387 in it. Noah wore a borrowed dress shirt. Claire cried before anyone else. Sophie stood beside Ethan while the judge signed the order. When they stepped into the courthouse hallway, Ethan reached into his pocket. Hold out your hand. Sophie looked suspicious. What? Your hand. She opened it. Ethan placed a brass house key in her palm. Sophie stared at it. I already know where the spare is. This isn't the spare. She looked up. What is it? Yours. For several seconds she said nothing. Ethan folded her fingers around the key. In my house, nobody waits outside wondering if they're allowed in. Sophie's throat moved. Ethan continued. And nobody gets left standing in the rain. She closed her hand around the key. Noah stepped beside her. Claire stood just behind Ethan. Outside the courthouse windows, rain washed the city streets clean. That night, Sophie placed the brass key on the table beside her bed instead of hiding it in her backpack. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to sleep. Bills were spread around him, repair estimates, a notebook filled with truck routes, 3 shipping invoices he had brought home from work. He rubbed his tired eyes and studied the numbers again. Then a floorboard creaked. Sophie appeared in the doorway. You can't sleep. She shook her head. Ethan tapped the chair beside him. She sat down. Her attention moved to the pages. What's all that? Problems. What kind? The expensive kind. She pulled one of the shipping sheets closer. Ethan watched her eyes move across the columns. Outside freight trucks rolled somewhere beyond the sleeping neighborhood. Sophie pointed at one line. Why does this truck come back empty? Ethan looked at her, then at the page. It shouldn't. She pointed to another. This one, too. Ethan leaned closer. For the first time that night, the exhaustion left his face. He pulled another invoice from the pile and set it between them. Keep reading. Sophie did. She kept reading until the kitchen clock moved past midnight and Ethan forgot how tired he was. The invoices covered routes between Savannah, Macon, Jacksonville, and Atlanta. To anyone else, they were ordinary freight records. Departure times, fuel costs, delivery windows, empty miles. To Ethan, they were proof that something about the system was broken. To Sophie, they were a puzzle. She dragged one sheet closer. This truck takes frozen seafood to Atlanta. Yes. Then it comes back empty. Usually. Why? Because the return load belongs to another carrier. Why does that matter? Because companies don't share schedules. That seems stupid. Ethan smiled. Welcome to logistics. Sophie frowned at the paper. So they would rather pay a driver to bring an empty truck back 300 miles than tell another company there is space? Pretty much. She looked at him. Adults built this. Unfortunately, That made her grin. Ethan pulled another invoice from the stack, then another. Cold storage facilities stood half empty on some days and overwhelmed on others. Drivers waited hours outside warehouses because appointments changed without reaching dispatchers. Containers sat at the port because one company had no idea another company's trucks were already available nearby. Every small delay became money. Every hour became fuel. Every empty mile became waste. Ethan had spent years repairing the trucks trapped inside that waste. Now sitting beneath a cheap kitchen light with Sophie beside him, he began to see a business inside the problem. Not a grand idea, not yet. Just a simple question. What if somebody coordinated the pieces nobody else bothered to connect? He took a legal pad and wrote 3 words. Empty return miles. Sophie watched him. Is that good? No. I mean the idea. Ethan looked at the page. I don't know. How do you find out? He gave her a tired smile. You just asked the expensive question. Over the next 6 months, the kitchen table became a second workplace. Ethan still repaired engines at the port during the day. At night, he studied freight rates. Noah helped him build spreadsheets on an old desktop computer with a fan that sounded like it might break apart at any moment. Sophie organized delivery slips by destination and time. Claire sometimes arrived after a hospital shift to find all 3 of them staring at roots taped across the wall. One night she stepped into the kitchen and stopped. Red string connected Savannah to Atlanta. Blue marker covered a map of Georgia. Invoices were spread across every surface. Claire looked at Ethan. Should I call somebody? He glanced up. Why? This looks like the home of a person the police eventually interview on television, Noah laughed. Sophie did not look away from the map. We are fixing trucking. Claire set a grocery bag on the counter. All of it. Eventually. Ethan shook his head. Ignore her. Claire leaned over his shoulder. What are you actually doing? He pointed to the routes. Independent carriers lose money on empty return trips. Warehouses lose money when capacity sits unused. Shippers lose money waiting for both. And you think you can connect them? I think somebody can. Claire looked at him carefully. And that somebody is you? Ethan hesitated. That was the part he still struggled to say out loud. He had spent most of his adult life being useful inside someone else's system. Mechanic, driver when needed, foreman on nights nobody else wanted. Starting a company meant believing his judgment was worth more than an hourly wage. That belief did not come naturally. Sophie looked up from the table. Why not you? Ethan met her eyes. She said it as if the answer were obvious. Claire smiled. Apparently the board has spoken. Ethan looked at Noah. His son shrugged. I already voted yes. You two don't get votes. Sophie returned to the paperwork. Then why are we doing all this? Ethan stared at the maps for a long moment. He did not have a good answer. 3 weeks later, he applied for a small business loan. The bank rejected him. The officer was polite. Too polite. Your income is stable, Mr. Cole, but the proposed operation has significant risk. I have contracts lined up. Letters of intent. From 4 customers. None guaranteed. Ethan sat across from the polished desk in a borrowed jacket. What would make the difference? More collateral. I don't have more. The banker folded his hands. Then my advice would be to continue building your savings. Ethan almost laughed. Saving enough money on a mechanic's salary to buy commercial trucks would take years. Outside the bank, Claire waited beside his pickup. She read his face before he spoke. No. What now? Ethan looked down the street. I go to work tomorrow. Claire nodded. And after that, he glanced at her. You sound like Sophie. That should concern you. He smiled faintly. Then his expression became serious. I could sell Rachel's car. Claire did not answer immediately. The car had been sitting beneath a cover beside the house since Rachel died. Ethan rarely drove it. He rarely even touched it. Still selling it felt like removing a piece of her from the property. Claire understood that. You don't have to prove anything, she said. I'm not. Are you sure? Ethan looked toward the passing traffic. No. Claire stepped closer. What would Rachel tell you? He let out a breath. She'd tell me the car is a car. And then, she'd make fun of me for being sentimental. Claire smiled. Sounds reasonable. Ethan sold the car. He used the money as collateral for a smaller loan through a local credit union. It was enough for 3 used tractor units. Calling them used was generous. The first was 12 years old. The second leaked oil. The third had a transmission Ethan rebuilt himself in the gravel driveway while Noah handed him tools. Sophie painted the company name on a plywood sign. Coal Harbor Logistics. She stepped back. The C leaned slightly to the left. Ethan stared at it. You want me to fix that? No. It looks crooked. So do the trucks. Noah laughed. Ethan considered the sign. Fair point. Their first office was half of a rented garage near the port. The desk came from a church sale. The phone had a crack across the receiver. Noah installed a second-hand computer. Sophie created filing labels by hand. Claire brought in a coffee maker and declared it the company's first employee benefit. Ethan hired 2 drivers he knew from the port. The third truck he drove himself. The first month barely covered fuel. The second was worse. One customer paid 23 days late. Another canceled 2 routes with less than 12 hours' notice. Ethan learned quickly that understanding trucks did not mean understanding cash flow. At home, bills began stacking again. One night, Sophie found him at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. How bad? He looked up. You have school tomorrow. You didn't answer. Ethan leaned back. We are fine. Sophie narrowed her eyes. That means bad. It means adult problem. Those are usually the dumbest ones. He almost smiled. She sat across from him. Are you closing the company? No. You thought about it. Ethan said nothing. Sophie looked at the papers. Which part is losing money? All the parts. Helpful. He slid one sheet toward her. We need one good contract, something steady. Then get one. Ethan stared at her. You think I haven't considered that? I think you sound like you're waiting for somebody to give you permission. The words irritated him because they were close to the truth. He gathered the papers. Go to bed. Sophie stood. At the doorway, she stopped. You told me to judge you by what you actually do. Ethan looked at her. She continued. So do something. The next morning, he walked into the office of a regional seafood distributor and asked for the logistics manager. The receptionist told him there was no appointment. Ethan waited anyway. For nearly 2 hours. Finally, a man named Paul Mercer stepped into the lobby. You the truck guy. Ethan Cole. I have 5 minutes. Ethan used 4. He explained how Coal Harbor could move refrigerated seafood from Savannah to Atlanta and pair return routes with produce shipments moving south. Fewer empty miles, lower fuel costs, better delivery windows. Paul studied him. You have how many trucks? 3. Paul laughed. Ethan did not. You're asking me to trust a major refrigerated lane to 3 old trucks. I'm asking you to give me 1 route. And if you fail, you don't give me a second. Paul looked at him for a long moment. Friday, 4 in the afternoon. 1 load. Ethan nodded. I'll be here. Friday arrived with heat hanging over Savannah like wet fabric. The shipment left on time. Ethan drove. Noah and Sophie tracked the route from the garage. Claire brought dinner and found them staring at the computer screen. At 8:43 that night, Ethan called. Transmission temperature is climbing. Noah sat forward. How bad? Bad. Where are you? South of Macon. Sophie looked at the delivery deadline. Can you make Atlanta? Not in this truck. Noah pulled up the location of their second driver. Ray is coming south empty. Sophie looked at him. How far? 36 miles. She grabbed the phone. Dad, transfer the trailer. There was silence. What? Ray is 36 miles north of you. He doesn't have a reefer assignment. He has a tractor. Ethan understood. Noah was already calling Ray. 40 minutes later, on the shoulder of a service road outside Macon, the trailer was transferred. Ray drove north. Ethan stayed behind with the broken tractor. The shipment reached Atlanta at 4:17 in the morning, 13 minutes before the delivery window closed. Paul Mercer called Ethan just after sunrise. I heard your truck broke. It did. And the load still arrived. Yes. Paul was silent. Then he said, I have 6 routes next week. Ethan looked at the disabled truck beside him. We'll take them. Coal Harbor survived the month, then the next. Paul recommended them to another shipper. That shipper introduced Ethan to a produce distributor. Word traveled through the industry in a way advertising could not buy. Coal might be small. Coal might be driving equipment held together by skill and stubbornness. But if Ethan said a load would arrive, it arrived. 5 trucks became 8. 8 became 14. They moved into a larger yard. Ethan hired mechanics before he hired salespeople. He believed a broken truck could destroy trust faster than a weak marketing campaign. Noah spent weekends improving the dispatch system. Sophie, now in high school, still did homework at the office. One evening, she sat behind Ethan's desk reading a contract. He walked in carrying 2 coffees. That is not homework. It is educational. It's 40 pages of warehouse indemnification. Exactly. Ethan put a cup beside her. Normal teenagers sneak out to parties. I can start if it makes you feel better. No. She turned another page. Ethan sat across from her. You don't have to read all that. You do. I'm getting to it. Sophie looked at the signature page. You already signed the last one without reading it. I read most of it. She gave him a look. Ethan sighed. Fine. She flipped backward. Page 27. What about it? Read it. Ethan leaned closer. The clause shifted nearly all liability for temperature-related losses onto Cole Harbor, even if the warehouse customer's own equipment caused the failure. He read it twice, then looked at Sophie. Where did you learn what indemnification means? Internet. That is not reassuring. This clause is terrible. It is. You were going to sign it. Ethan took the contract. I was. Sophie folded her arms. You tell drivers to inspect every tire before leaving the yard. Yes. But you don't inspect contracts. Ethan looked at the page again. She was right. He hated that. He also loved it. The next day, Ethan called the customer and refused the clause. They renegotiated. That evening, he returned the contract to Sophie. Changed. She read page 27, then the final page. Only then did she nod. Ethan watched her. Remember this. What? You can lose money and make it back. She looked up. You can lose a truck and buy another. He tapped the agreement. But one sentence you didn't read can take things you spent years building. Sophie listened. Never sign anything until you have read the last word. She looked back at the page. The last word. Every time. That sentence stayed with her. Soon she was reading more than contracts. She borrowed books about business law from the public library, then books about trusts, then court opinions she barely understood but refused to stop reading. Claire found her one Sunday morning at the kitchen table with 3 law books open. Are you planning a crime? Sophie did not look up. The opposite. Claire poured coffee. That sounds less profitable. Sophie smiled. Then her expression became thoughtful. Why do people lose things because they don't understand paperwork? Claire leaned against the counter. What things? Houses, jobs, companies. Sometimes people make bad decisions. Sometimes. Sophie closed the book. But sometimes someone puts a bad decision in front of them and makes it look normal. Claire studied her. That bothers you. Shouldn't it? Yes. Sophie looked through the window toward the driveway where Ethan and Noah were repairing a truck. I think I want to be a lawyer, Claire smiled. Because of Ethan? Sophie shook her head. Because somebody needs to read page 27. Years passed. Cole Harbor grew with them. 30 trucks, then 60. A refrigerated warehouse outside Savannah. A second facility near Atlanta. A contract moving food for hospitals during a regional emergency. Rail partnerships followed. Ethan learned to sit in meetings with men who wore watches worth more than his first fleet. He never became comfortable there. He simply became harder to intimidate. When Sophie was accepted to law school, she told nobody for 3 days. Noah found the envelope hidden beneath a textbook. He carried it straight to Ethan. She got in. Sophie walked into the kitchen. You opened my mail. No. You read the front. It says congratulations. Ethan looked at her. Why didn't you tell me? Sophie took the letter. Because I'm not going. The room went quiet. Claire looked up from the stove. Why? Sophie handed Ethan the tuition sheet. He read the number, then read it again. You got a scholarship. Not enough. We'll figure it out. No. Sophie. I said no. Ethan looked at her. She continued. The company needs cash. The new warehouse is already over budget. Noah needs tuition next year, too. Noah raised a hand. I can become a criminal. Not helping, Ethan said. Sophie looked at him. You are not selling anything for me. Ethan said nothing. That should have warned her. 2 weeks later, she drove past the company yard and saw an empty space. The first truck was gone. The old white tractor with faded paint and a driver's seat Ethan had repaired 3 times. She walked into his office. You sold it. Ethan did not look up. Good afternoon. You sold the first truck. Yes. I told you not to. I don't remember giving you purchasing authority. Sophie shut the door. That truck started this company. Ethan finally looked at her. No. Yes, it did. No. He stood. That truck carried freight. Sophie stared at him. People built this company. He slid a tuition receipt across the desk. The truck did its job. Her eyes filled. You loved that truck. I complained about that truck every day for 6 years. You know what I mean. Ethan's expression softened. He stepped closer. It helped me build a future. Sophie looked down. Now it gets to help build yours. She shook her head. I can't pay you back. Ethan became still. Then he lifted her chin gently until she looked at him. I did not ask you to. She swallowed. Then what am I supposed to do with this? Go to school. That's it? No. A faint smile appeared. Read everything. She laughed once through her tears, then wrapped her arms around him. By the time Sophie graduated, Coal Harbor Logistics had become Coal Atlantic Freight and Rail. The little yard near the port had become a network of warehouses, terminals, refrigerated facilities, and rail connections stretching beyond Georgia. The company employed thousands. Its valuation climbed toward $900 million. Ethan still wore work boots to executive meetings. He still walked the maintenance floor before visiting the corporate offices. When drivers retired, he attended their dinners. When a mechanic's daughter needed surgery, Ethan quietly arranged paid leave. Investors admired the loyalty until they saw the cost. That was when Victor Langford entered Ethan's life. Victor arrived with a reputation for turning regional companies into national ones. He spoke carefully. He dressed carefully. Even his pauses seemed rehearsed. During his first board dinner, he watched Ethan leave the private dining room halfway through the meal because a driver had been injured in the yard. Victor found him later near the loading docks. You left 3 investors at the table. Marcus broke his wrist. He has supervisors. He works for me. Victor adjusted his cuff. 3,000 people work for you. Exactly. Victor studied him. You cannot personally carry all of them. Ethan looked toward the ambulance leaving the property. I am not trying to. It looks like you are. That disagreement grew over the following years. Victor wanted lower labor costs. Ethan refused cuts he believed would damage retention and safety. Victor wanted to sell unprofitable regional routes. Ethan argued some of those routes kept small manufacturers alive. Victor pushed for aggressive restructuring. Ethan resisted. One afternoon after a particularly tense board meeting, Victor closed the conference room door. You are running a company approaching $1 billion with a garage owner's conscience. Ethan collected his papers. That conscience built the company? Victor smiled without warmth. Conscience is expensive. So is replacing people who stop trusting you. You confuse loyalty with strategy. Ethan looked at him. And you confuse extraction with management. Neither man smiled. As outside capital increased, Ethan became concerned about losing control of the company's purpose. He met with corporate attorneys. Maggie Hayes, who had worked with him since the early years, sat through every discussion. The result was the Coal Founders Trust. A portion of Ethan's founding voting shares was placed into the trust. The structure was designed to protect the company if control was threatened through concealed conflicts, serious breaches of duty, or manipulated records. It was not designed to give Sophie money. She was named as a future eligible protector once she became legally qualified. Maggie maintained the filings. Every renewal was recorded. Every disclosure was preserved. Ethan also attached a statement explaining why the structure existed. He wrote it himself. Sophie read the draft at his kitchen table. You know lawyers are going to rewrite this. They already tried. She smiled. One line caught her attention. A company should never become powerful enough to forget the people who made it possible. She looked at Ethan. That's not very legal. No. Then why include it? Because lawyers aren't the only people who may need to understand it. Sophie kept reading. Near the bottom was another sentence. If anyone uses my family as leverage to seize this company, the protector must defend the promise before defending the fortune. She looked up. That's dramatic. Ethan shrugged. I raised you. You found me. Then I made several questionable long-term decisions. She smiled. Ethan signed the statement. Maggie placed it with the trust documents. Then everyone returned to work. Outside, coal Atlantic trains moved through the Savannah yards beneath the evening lights. Trucks rolled toward interstate highways. Refrigerated warehouses hummed through the night. From the upper floor of the administration building, Ethan stood at the glass and watched the company moving below him. Victor Langford stepped beside him. For several moments, they said nothing. Then Victor looked across the rail yard. $900 million. Ethan glanced at him. What? That's what the latest valuation puts us near. Ethan looked back at the workers below. Victor continued. You ever think about what you could do if you sold? No. Not even once. No. Victor smiled faintly. Everyone has a number. Ethan watched a mechanic guide a truck into a service bay. Maybe. Victor turned toward him. What's yours? Ethan took his old canvas jacket from the back of a chair. I haven't seen it written down yet. Then he walked out, leaving Victor alone beside the glass. Victor remained beside the glass long after Ethan disappeared into the hallway. Below him, the yard moved with the rhythm Ethan loved. Forklifts crossed between warehouses. Drivers climbed into cabs. A locomotive eased backward beneath white floodlights while a ground worker guided it with one raised hand. To Ethan, every movement represented a person. To Victor, it represented value, and value in his experience was only useful when someone was willing to extract it. His phone vibrated. Victor looked at the name on the screen before answering. Celeste Whitmore. Did he give you a number? No. Everyone gives a number eventually. Not Ethan. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that makes him either admirable or expensive. Victor looked down at the rail yard. Mostly expensive. 3 weeks later, Celeste Whitmore arrived in Savannah. She did not come with photographers or assistants carrying presentation cases. She came in a black sedan and walked into Coal Atlantic headquarters wearing a cream suit and the calm expression of someone who had already studied every person in the room. Whitmore Capital Partners controlled investments across transportation, warehousing, energy, and infrastructure. Celeste had built her reputation by purchasing companies that looked too complicated to divide. Then she divided them. She sat across from Ethan in the boardroom and opened a thin folder. We are prepared to offer a significant premium. Ethan did not touch the paper. For what? For control. I know what control means. Celeste smiled. Then we can skip the theater. Victor sat 2 seats away. Other board members watched quietly. Celeste continued. Your rail assets are undervalued. Your refrigerated facilities are underleveraged. Your regional routes are carrying costs that do not justify their margins. Ethan leaned back. And your solution? Separate the businesses, meaning sell the rail corridor to an infrastructure fund, consolidate warehouse operations, eliminate routes that do not meet profitability thresholds. One director shifted in his chair. Ethan looked at Celeste. How many jobs disappear? Celeste did not blink. That depends on how efficiently the transition is handled. Give me a number. We are discussing shareholder value. I asked about people. Victor exhaled softly. Celeste closed the folder. Mr. Cole, with respect, this is exactly the problem. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What problem? You built a company large enough to matter, but you still manage it as if every employee is standing in your garage. Some of them were. That was a long time ago. Not to them. Celeste studied him. Then she leaned forward. Your company may be worth $900 million today. Properly structured, the underlying assets could be worth considerably more. And you would like the difference. My investors would. Ethan stood. Then they should build their own company. The meeting ended 11 minutes later. Victor watched Ethan leave. Celeste remained seated. The other directors slowly gathered their papers. When the room emptied, Victor closed the door. Celeste looked at him. "He is worse than you described." Victor poured himself water. More stubborn. More sentimental. "He thinks that is strength." Celeste smiled faintly. "It can be." Victor glanced at her. She continued, "Until the structure around him changes." That evening they met in a private dining room at a hotel overlooking the Savannah River. No company employees, no assistants, no minutes. Celeste placed a financial model on the table between them. 3 divisions were highlighted: rail, cold storage, port contracts. If Whitmore acquires control at current valuation, the return is good. Victor turned a page. And if the valuation drops, the return becomes exceptional. How far? Celeste looked at him. 20% would be useful. Victor gave a short laugh. Ethan would fight every inch. I am counting on it. She slid another document across the table, a consulting agreement. Victor read the figure, then read it again. Celeste watched him. You would advise Whitmore during transition? That is a generous advisory fee. You would also retain a seat in the successor structure. Victor's expression remained controlled. Equity, subject to performance. He looked out toward the river. For years, Victor had told himself Ethan was wasting the company. Too much spent on labor, too many concessions to employees, too much money tied to roots that existed because Ethan remembered the small businesses that depended on them. Victor had once admired that loyalty. Then the valuation crossed $500 million. Admiration began to look like frustration. At $900 million, frustration became contempt. Victor looked back at Celeste. What exactly are you proposing? I am proposing that the company encounter a governance problem. Victor said nothing. Celeste folded her hands. Ethan controls too much voting authority. Remove that authority temporarily and the board changes. Temporarily? That is all we need. Victor stared at the consulting agreement. Then he picked up the pen. Months passed. From the outside, nothing changed. Ethan worked. Noah expanded the fleet technologies systems. Maggie maintained corporate records. Claire continued dividing her life between the hospital and Ethan. Sophie practiced law in Washington and called home almost every Sunday night. Inside the boardroom, Victor began searching. He requested old financing records, voting agreements, corporate amendments, trust disclosures. Nobody questioned him at first. He was chairman. Maggie noticed only because Victor began asking for documents nobody had requested in years. One afternoon, he appeared at her desk. I need the founder's trust records. Maggie looked up. Which version? All of them. For what purpose? Victor smiled. Board review. That is not a purpose. His smile weakened. I was not aware I required your approval. You do not. Maggie turned toward her computer. But I need a record of why documents are released. Governance review. She typed the words. Better. Victor watched her. You have worked here a long time. 19 years. That kind of loyalty is rare. Maggie looked at him. So is good filing. She retrieved the digital records and provided the versions available through the central archive. Victor thanked her, but he did not leave the matter alone. The trust was complicated. That was useful. It had been created during a period when Coal Atlantic was bringing in outside investors, but Ethan still controlled significant founder voting shares. One amendment referenced an attached schedule, Schedule C. Victor searched the central archive. It was there, Protective Voting Authority. He read the provisions slowly. The trust could activate temporary voting protections if there was evidence of serious fiduciary misconduct connected to a hostile change of control. Victor sat back. For nearly a minute he did nothing. Then he smiled. The protection itself was dangerous, but the incomplete trust looked very different. Without Schedule C, several transfers could be framed as something else entirely. A benefit structure, a private arrangement, a founder moving value into a trust associated with his daughter. Victor did not need to forge Ethan's signature. The signature was real. The pages were real. He only needed people to see less than the whole truth. Late one night, Victor accessed the document system from his office. He downloaded the complete file, removed Schedule C from the working copy, then uploaded the incomplete version under the same archive title. The central system registered the replacement. Victor believed nobody would notice. He underestimated Noah. The lawsuit arrived on a Monday morning. Ethan was walking through the maintenance yard when Maggie found him. She did not call. She came herself. That was how he knew it was serious. She handed him a thick envelope. "What is this?" "Emergency shareholder action." He opened it. The first page named him personally. The second accused him of misuse of corporate assets. By the third, he had stopped walking. Noah approached from the technology building. "Dad?" Ethan said nothing. Maggie looked pale. Noah took the documents. His eyes moved rapidly over the pages. Then he saw Sophie's name. "What the hell is this?" Ethan took the papers back. "Inside." They went to his office. The accusation was simple enough for television. Ethan Cole had transferred valuable company assets into a private trust connected to his adopted daughter. The plaintiffs claimed the transfers were concealed. They claimed the trust served no legitimate business purpose. They claimed Ethan's control of the company should be suspended until an investigation determined whether he had violated his duties. Victor called an emergency board meeting that afternoon. He entered looking exhausted, concerned, almost wounded. Ethan watched the performance from across the table. Victor spoke first. "I want everyone to understand that I take no pleasure in this." Ethan stared at him. Victor continued. "The board has a duty to protect shareholders regardless of personal relationships." Noah leaned forward. "You filed this." Victor looked at him. "The action was brought by shareholders. Through lawyers you approved." "Watch your tone." Ethan placed one hand on Noah's arm. Noah stopped. Victor turned toward Ethan. "If the allegations are false, the court will determine that." Ethan's voice was quiet. "You know they are false." Victor held his gaze. "I know the documents exist." "So do I." "Then perhaps you should explain why company assets were transferred into a trust bearing Sophie's name." Ethan's face hardened. "You have read the trust." Victor paused. "Parts of it." That answer stayed with Ethan. Parts. By evening, the story had reached the press. By Tuesday morning, it was everywhere. Port founder accused of hiding millions in daughter's trust. Cole Atlantic Board questions founder's financial conduct. Adopted daughter linked to controversial asset transfers. Reporters appeared outside headquarters, then outside Ethan's house. One stood near the edge of the driveway shouting questions while Claire closed the curtains. "Mr. Cole, did you use company funds to enrich your daughter? Was the adoption connected to the trust? Did Sophie Cole receive undisclosed payments?" Ethan stood in the living room completely still. On television, a commentator displayed an old photograph of Sophie as a child, the yellow rain jacket, the bus station intake photograph. Ethan walked across the room and turned the television off. Claire watched him. "They don't even know her." "No. They are showing her like she is evidence." Claire stepped closer. "They need a story." "She was 9. "I know." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I should have kept her out of this." "You did." He looked at Claire. "Somebody else dragged her in." The financial damage arrived almost immediately. A bank paused an expanded credit facility. A government agency delayed contract negotiations. 2 large customers requested written confirmation that operations would continue if Ethan lost control. Rumors spread through the yards faster than official statements. Marcus, the driver Ethan had once left a board dinner to help after an accident found him near the dispatch building. "My wife saw the news." Ethan nodded. "Most people did." "She asked if I should start looking somewhere else." Ethan looked across the yard. Drivers were loading for night routes. Forklifts moved between trailers. People with mortgages, children, medical bills, retirement plans. Ethan wanted to tell Marcus nothing would change. Instead, he said, "I don't know." Marcus studied him. Ethan hated the answer. "But payroll is good this week." "This week?" "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right." He started walking away, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I don't believe them." Ethan looked at him. Marcus shrugged. "You never stole from us when you were broke. Doesn't make much sense you'd start after getting rich." Then he left. That night, Noah stayed alone in the technology office. The lawsuit bothered him, not emotionally, technically. The plaintiffs possessed internal documents. That meant someone had accessed them. He opened the archive logs, trust records, search, access history, Victor Langford, again. Noah leaned closer. One file showed a replacement event. His pulse changed. He opened the backup index. The version currently stored had fewer pages than the version that existed 6 months earlier. Noah called Sophie. She answered after midnight. "You sound terrible." "I found something." "What?" The trust file changed. Silence. Changed how? An older backup is larger. "Who accessed it?" Noah looked at the screen. "Victor." Another silence, then Sophie's voice became sharper. "Do not tell Dad yet." "What?" "Do not tell Victor. Do not tell the board. Do not touch the original logs." "Sophie, this proves something." "It proves a file changed. After Victor accessed it. It is a lead, Noah, not proof of why." He leaned back. "What are you doing?" "Send me everything." "Why?" "Because somebody expects us to panic." Noah looked through the dark window toward the empty yard. "What are you going to do?" Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Read to the last page." The next morning, Ethan called her. No answer. He tried again at lunch. Voicemail. By evening, Sophie's office said she had taken emergency leave. Her apartment in Washington was dark. Noah called 7 times. Claire called twice. Maggie sent 3 messages. Nothing came back. On the second day, Victor learned Sophie could not be reached. By noon, a reporter asked him about it outside headquarters. Victor lowered his eyes with carefully measured sadness. "I cannot speak for Miss Cole. Does her absence concern you?" "Of course." "Do you believe she is refusing to defend her father?" Victor paused just long enough. "I think every family reaches a point where loyalty and truth are forced to separate." The clip played all afternoon. At home, Ethan watched it once, then turned the television off. Claire stood behind him. "Do you think she left?" "No." The answer came immediately. Claire sat beside him. "You hesitated earlier." Ethan looked toward the dark window. "I'm afraid." "Of Victor." "No." "Then what?" Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. "That Sophie thinks she has to fix this." Claire waited. "I took her in because she needed somewhere safe." He stared at the floor. "I sold a truck because she earned the chance to go to school." Claire said nothing. "I never wanted any of that to become an account she thought she had to settle." "You think she believes she owes you?" "I hope she doesn't." Claire rested her hand over his. "You gave her a home, Ethan. That doesn't make her responsible for saving mine." His phone remained silent on the table. 300 miles away, Sophie stood beneath the fluorescent lights of a private records facility outside Macon. Rows of archival boxes disappeared into the darkness behind a locked security door. An employee placed an old request log in front of her. Sophie traced one line with her finger. Someone had requested access to the Cole files 2 weeks earlier. Authorization source, chairman of the board, Victor Langford. Sophie looked up. "Where are the original boxes?" The employee hesitated. "Some are still here." "Some?" He turned toward the rows of shelving. One was moved. Sophie's expression changed. "Moved where?" The man reached for another record. Sophie watched his finger travel down the page, then stop. Her hand tightened around the old brass house key she still carried in her purse. "Show me." The records employee looked at Sophie for a moment as if deciding how much trouble he was willing to invite into an otherwise quiet morning. Then he turned the monitor toward himself. "The request came through corporate authorization." "I can see that. The box was not removed permanently." "Where is it?" He scrolled. "Transferred to secondary storage." "By whom?" "Courier service." Sophie leaned closer. "When?" 12 days ago." "Destination?" The man hesitated. "That information is restricted." Sophie opened her leather bag and placed a letter on the counter. "I am counsel for the designated protector of the trust contained in those records." He read the letter, then looked at her. "You are the protector?" "Yes." "Your father is Ethan Cole." Sophie felt the old irritation immediately, not because he had asked, because she knew what usually came after. The homeless girl, the adoption, the trust, the scandal. She kept her voice level. My father is not relevant to whether I am legally entitled to inspect trust records. The man handed the letter back, no offense intended. Then let's not waste time creating any. He looked at the screen again. The box had been sent to a private archival annex 40 miles away. Sophie wrote down the address. Before leaving, she pointed toward the request log. I need a certified copy of that page. That could take a few hours. I'll wait. He sighed. Sophie sat in a plastic chair beneath a fluorescent light. Her phone vibrated. Dad. She stared at the name. The call continued, then stopped. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. Sophie did not listen to it. Not yet. She placed the phone face down on her knee. Across the room, the employee stamped the first page of her request. 40 minutes later, Sophie was driving north through light rain. The landscape changed from warehouses and highway exits to pine trees and old service roads. Her rental car smelled faintly of coffee and wet paper. On the passenger seat sat Noah's printed system logs. Victor had accessed the trust file 5 times. The final access corresponded with the replacement event. Sophie had spent enough time investigating corporate fraud to know how dangerous partial evidence could be. People wanted discoveries to arrive cleanly. One guilty name, one deleted file, one payment. Real misconduct rarely behaved that politely. Every fact needed another fact behind it. She could prove Victor touched the file. She could prove the version changed. She could not yet prove he changed it. And if she accused him too early, he would know exactly what she was looking for. That was why she had told Noah to stay quiet. That was why she had ignored Ethan's calls. The silence hurt. But she had spent years watching powerful people survive investigations because somebody confronted them before understanding how wide the lie had become. She would not make that mistake. The secondary facility stood behind a chain-link fence near an industrial park. Inside, a woman named Linda retrieved the transfer record. Her eyebrows rose when she saw the file number. You're the second person asking about this. Sophie stopped. Who was first? I can't give you a name without authorization. Male or female? Linda looked uncomfortable. I really shouldn't. Sophie placed the certified request from the first facility on the desk. This archive contains records connected to an active court proceeding. If somebody accessed or moved material evidence chain of custody matters. Linda read the page, then lowered her voice. Male. When? Last week. Did he take anything? He inspected the box. How long? About an hour. Did you watch him? No. Was he alone? Yes. Sophie felt cold despite the warm room. Bring me the box. Linda disappeared into the storage area. When she returned, she was pushing a gray cart. A long archival carton sat on top. Sophie saw the label and felt her pulse increase. Coal Harbor Logistics Corporate Organization Founders Trust. She put on examination gloves. The box contained old meeting notes, executed agreements, correspondence, draft trust provisions, tax letters, early shareholder records. Sophie worked slowly, page by page, folder by folder, Schedule A, Schedule B, no Schedule C. She searched again. Nothing. At the bottom of the box lay an empty paper jacket labeled Protective Voting Authority. The jacket had once contained something. Sophie held it beneath the desk lamp. A faint rectangular discoloration marked where pages had been stored for years. They were gone. Linda stood several feet away. Is something missing? Yes. Could it have been stored separately? It could. Sophie examined the jacket more closely. On the inside was an old handwritten notation. M. Hayes duplicate custody. Sophie stopped breathing for half a second. Maggie. She took a photograph, then called her. Maggie answered immediately. Thank God. Do not call Dad. A pause. Sophie, he is terrified. I know. Then call him. I can't yet. You sound exactly like him. That is not helping. Maggie sighed. What did you find? A note in the original archive. Your name, duplicate custody. Silence. Sophie stood. Maggie. I remember. What? The schedule. Where is it? I don't know. Sophie closed her eyes. Maggie. Give me a moment. She heard a chair move through the phone, then drawers, paper. Maggie spoke again. When we created the trust, the lawyers wanted one complete original set stored off-site. Ethan wanted another. Why? He didn't trust having everything in one place. Where did you put it? I need to think. Sophie looked at the empty jacket. Someone removed Schedule C from this archive. Maggie's breathing changed. Victor, I don't know. You think it was him? I think he knew where to look. Maggie became quiet, then said, There was an attorney. What attorney? Samuel Pierce. He drafted most of the original trust language. Where is he? Retired. Where? I haven't spoken to him in years. Find him. Sophie. Please. That one word changed Maggie's tone. I will. Sophie ended the call. Her phone displayed 11 missed calls. 4 from Ethan, 3 from Noah, 2 from Claire, 2 from an unknown number. She looked at Ethan's name again, then opened his voicemail. His voice filled the parked car. Hey. A pause. I don't know where you are. Another pause. I am not going to ask you to come home. Sophie closed her eyes. I just want to know you're safe. His voice sounded older than it had 3 days earlier. If you're doing something because you think you have to fix this, you don't. Silence. You don't owe me that. The message ended. Sophie held the phone against her chest. For several seconds, she was 9 years old again. Wet shoes, yellow jacket, a man she barely knew promising to return. She nearly called him. Her thumb reached the screen. Then the unknown number called again. Sophie answered. Hello, a man's voice. Ms. Cole. Yes. My name is Thomas Wynn. I represent parties who may have an interest in resolving the current situation involving Cole Atlantic. Sophie sat straighter. What parties? I think it would be better discussed privately. Then name them privately. A pause. Whitmore Capital. Sophie looked through the windshield. Rain had begun again. What does Whitmore Capital want with me? A conversation. About my father. About your future. Sophie's expression hardened. Those are not the same subject. Perhaps not. He gave her an address in Charleston, a hotel lounge, tomorrow, 6 in the evening. Sophie wrote nothing down. I'll think about it. Please do. The call ended. She immediately saved the number, then sent it to a forensic researcher she trusted in Washington. After that, she called an ethics attorney. Not Ethan, not Noah, not Maggie. An attorney whose job was to tell her exactly what she could record, preserve, accept, reject, and later disclose. By evening, Maggie called back. I found Pierce. Where? Outside Augusta. Assisted living community. Is he competent? His daughter says he had a stroke last year, but he still remembers clients. Sophie drove through the night. Samuel Pierce looked smaller than she expected. He sat near a window in a private room overlooking a courtyard. One side of his face drooped slightly. His speech was slower than it had once been. But when Sophie introduced herself, recognition appeared almost immediately. Cole. Yes. Ethan's girl. Sophie sat beside him. His daughter. Pierce smiled. That's what I said. She smiled despite herself. I need to ask you about the Founders Trust. The smile disappeared. Trouble? Yes. Bored? Yes. Pierce looked toward the courtyard. I told him. Told Ethan what boardrooms change men. Did you draft Schedule C? Pierce looked at her. Protective authority. Yes. He nodded. Sophie leaned forward. The copy in the corporate archive is gone. Pierce did not appear surprised. Then somebody understood it. Explain it to me. His good hand moved slowly across the blanket. Ethan was bringing in investors, needed capital, didn't want control protections that could be used for personal enrichment. So the trust held founder shares. Correct. Why my name? Pierce smiled faintly. Your name wasn't on it at first. Sophie frowned. Whose was? Independent protector, professional trustee. Later amendment allowed succession. To me. Once qualified. Why? Pierce studied her. Because Ethan trusted you to understand both sides. What sides? Paper and people. Sophie looked down. Pierce continued. He used to say contracts matter because people eventually forget what they promised. That sounds like him. We wrote the trust so nobody could easily strip control through concealed conflicts or manipulated governance. Did it protect him personally? No. Could he use it simply because he disliked a sale? No. Could it activate if records were manipulated to support a hostile control transaction? Pierce nodded slowly. That was the idea. Sophie sat back. That mattered. A lot. Do you know where a duplicate original was stored? Pierce frowned. Maggie. She remembers duplicate custody, but not where. Not office. Where? Pierce closed his eyes. For several seconds, Sophie thought he had lost the thread. Then he whispered, Ethan didn't trust offices. Why? Fire. Sophie waited. Pierce opened his eyes. First garage flooded once, records ruined. Where did he keep the duplicate? Pierce shook his head. Not me. Sophie felt the frustration rise. Then Pierce caught her wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. He was not making you rich. Sophie stopped. Pierce's eyes sharpened. Understand that. I do. No, listen. His voice became rough. He told me he would rather burn his shares than make his children prisoners of them. Sophie felt something tighten in her throat. Pierce continued. The trust was not inheritance. What was it? A lock. Against what? Pierce looked directly at her. Men with clean hands taking what men with dirty hands built. Sophie sat very still. She thanked him before leaving. Outside she called Maggie. No answer. She called again. This time Maggie picked up. I remembered something. Sophie stopped beside her car. What? Safe deposit archive. Where? Not a bank. Private legal storage. Ethan hated banks after the first loan rejection. Sophie almost laughed. Of course he did. There was a facility outside Savannah we used during the expansion years. Name? Maggie gave it to her. Then her voice dropped. Sophie Victor asked me about historic offsite storage 6 months ago. Sophie's smile vanished. What exactly did he ask? Whether any originals existed outside the corporate archive. What did you tell him? That old storage arrangements had changed. Did you give him the location? No. Could he have found it another way? Possibly. Sophie looked at the time. She had to reach Charleston by 6 the next evening. I need you to do something. Anything. Pull every annual trust disclosure you personally filed. I already have. Every renewal. Yes. Anything showing Victor received them. Maggie went silent, then said, Board distribution lists. You have them. I kept everything. Sophie smiled for the first time that day. That's why some people stopped liking you. Maggie laughed softly. You sound like me now. No, I file less. By noon the next day, Maggie had sent scanned copies. Every renewal was timely. Every disclosure was complete. Victor's office appeared repeatedly on circulation records. He could not credibly claim the trust had been hidden. Sophie printed everything at a small copy shop. Then Noah sent another message. Call me. She did. Tell me you found something. I found a payment. What kind? Victor has a consulting company. Everyone on that board has a consulting company. This one got paid by Savannah Strategic Holdings. Sophie opened her laptop. Who owns it? That gets messy. Messy is useful. 2 LLCs, one Delaware, one Nevada. And at the end, I am still tracing it. Send me everything. Noah hesitated. Can I ask you something? No. Too bad. Sophie waited. Are you coming home? Her eyes moved toward the highway. Yes. When I don't know, Dad thinks you are in trouble. I am not. That is exactly what Dad says when he is in trouble. Sophie almost smiled. Noah. What? If I tell him what I am doing, what happens? He gets in his truck. Exactly. He does not have the old truck anymore. You understand my point? Noah sighed. Fine. Keep him away from Victor. That might be harder. Then lie. I'm terrible at lying. You were 11 when I met you, I know. She ended the call. At 6 that evening, Sophie entered the Charleston Hotel lounge. Thomas Wynne was already seated, late 40s, gray suit, no tie, a glass of water untouched in front of him. He stood. Ms. Cole. Sophie. They sat. She placed her phone inside her bag, exactly as her ethics counsel had instructed after confirming the applicable recording rules and circumstances. Thomas smiled. "You have had an impressive career. I doubt you brought me here to discuss my resume. Direct, tired, fair." A server approached. Sophie ordered coffee. Thomas waited until the server left. "I am authorized to discuss an opportunity." "What kind?" "A firm in New York is looking for someone with your background." "My legal background or my family background?" Thomas smiled carefully. "Both are relevant." There it was. Sophie stirred sugar into her coffee. "What is the job?" "Partnership track, significant compensation." "How significant?" He wrote a number on a small card. Sophie looked at it. 7 figures across the first 2 years. She placed the card down. "That is generous. They value talent." "They have never interviewed me." Thomas leaned back. "Some people are easy to evaluate from a distance." Sophie looked at him. "What does Whitmore want?" "No betrayal." "I did not ask what you don't want." Thomas paused. "Availability can influence complicated situations." "Meaning?" "The hearing is in 2 days. I know. Sometimes the wisest action is to allow experienced corporate counsel to handle corporate matters." "My father is being accused of stealing from me." "No one is asking you to lie." "Then what are you asking me to do?" Thomas folded his hands. "Nothing." Sophie let silence sit between them. He continued. "That is the point." Her face remained unreadable. "And if I do nothing, the offer moves forward. Immediately." "Yes." "What happens to my father?" "He survives." "And the company?" Thomas looked at her for a second too long. "That depends on what you mean by survives." Sophie felt the answer settle into place. "Not just acquisition, breakup." She looked down at the card again. "What if I need time?" "Take tonight. And tomorrow. We need certainty before the hearing." Sophie nodded slowly. Thomas relaxed. He thought she was considering it. "Good." She let him. "What if I simply don't appear?" Thomas smiled. "Then nobody can accuse you of doing anything wrong." Sophie looked into his eyes. "No one needs me to betray my father." "No, we only need you to stay silent." Thomas nodded once. "Exactly." The meeting ended 17 minutes later. Sophie walked calmly through the lobby. She did not listen to the recording until she was inside her car with the doors locked. When Thomas's voice repeated the sentence, she closed her eyes. Exactly. She sent the file to secure storage, then to ethics counsel, then to a forensic audio specialist for preservation. Only after that did she allow herself to shake. Not from fear, from anger. They had calculated her childhood, her adoption, her education, her relationship with Ethan, then assigned each one a price. The next morning Noah called. I found the end of the payment chain." Sophie was already driving south. "Tell me." "Savannah Strategic Holdings is funded through Whitmore Development Group. Whitmore Capital. Same parent ownership." "Amount," Noah told her. Sophie tightened her grip on the wheel. "Date. The day Victor authorized the shareholder action." She exhaled slowly. "Send the corporate ownership records." "Already did." "Good. There is more." "What?" "I searched an old board backup." Sophie slowed. "And Victor had a private meeting. With Whitmore? Looks like it. Minutes? Not in the central system. Reference only. Confidential presentation attached somewhere else." Sophie thought. If it is not in company records, where would they store it? External counsel. Find the law firm. An hour later, Noah called back with a name. The rest required legal work. Sophie contacted a former colleague. An emergency records request connected to the active proceeding produced a narrow set of authenticated materials already referenced in corporate disclosure files. One document changed the case. Private transaction minutes. Victor had promised that if Ethan's voting authority could be suspended, he could deliver a board majority for the sale of 51% of Coal Atlantic. The proposed price was dramatically below the company's independent valuation. Attached to the minutes was a post-acquisition model. Rail assets sold, cold storage divided, regional routes eliminated, labor obligations reduced. Sophie stared at the projections. Thousands of jobs existed only as cost categories. Warehouse staff, mechanics, drivers, dispatchers, people Ethan knew by name. There was a line for anticipated workforce reduction. Sophie read the number twice, then closed the file. She finally understood the entire shape of it. The lawsuit was not the goal. It was the tool. The scandal was not the goal. It was pressure. Her childhood was not the issue. It was leverage. Victor and Celeste did not need to prove Ethan guilty forever. They only needed him powerless long enough to vote. That afternoon, Sophie reached the private archival facility Maggie remembered. The building was smaller than she expected. The manager searched Ethan's name. Nothing. Cole Harbor Logistics. Nothing. Maggie Hayes. Nothing. Sophie felt the first real panic of the investigation. "Try Rachel Cole," the manager typed. A record appeared. Sophie stared. Rachel, Ethan's late wife. The storage account had originally been opened years before the company became large enough to attract attention. The manager retrieved a sealed archival box. The cardboard was old. One corner had softened with age. Across the top was Ethan's handwriting. For Sophie, if they ever make family the accusation. Sophie did not move. The manager looked at her. "Are you all right?" Yes. She was not. She carried the box into a private review room, closed the door, sat down. For several seconds she only looked at Ethan's handwriting. Then she opened it. Inside lay the complete trust. Schedule C, original notarized copies, annual certifications, Pierce's drafting notes, Maggie's filing records, everything. At the bottom was Ethan's founder statement. Sophie unfolded it. She knew the first lines. She had read them years earlier. A company should never become powerful enough to forget the people who made it possible. She continued. Pages passed. Then she reached a handwritten note near the end. Sophie, if you are reading this because somebody has decided your place in this family makes you evidence against me, then I am sorry. Her vision blurred. She kept reading. You never owe me for becoming my daughter. Not for the house, not for school, not for my name. Those were never loans. Sophie pressed her lips together. For a moment, the room became the hallway outside a Savannah courtroom. A brass key in her 9-year-old palm. A man with almost no money telling her she belonged somewhere. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Then she remembered his voice. Read everything. So she did, all the way to the final pages. Schedule C defined the protector's authority. 3 triggering conditions mattered. A serious breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation or concealment of company records, an attempted hostile change of control connected to that misconduct. Sophie read the provision again, then a third time. The trust had not predicted Victor. It had not predicted Celeste. It had not predicted a lawsuit involving her childhood. It did not need to. It had predicted behavior. And Victor had supplied every condition himself. Sophie sat back. For the first time in 4 days, she knew Ethan could survive the hearing. If she could authenticate everything. If the court admitted it. If Victor did not discover what she had first. Her phone vibrated. Dad, again. Sophie stared at the screen until her eyes hurt. Then she answered, but she did not speak. Ethan! She heard Claire in the background, then Ethan's voice. Hello? Sophie covered her mouth with one hand. Hello? She ended the call. Her heart pounded. She hated herself for it. Then she looked at the trust, at the recording, at the financial records, at Victor's access logs, at the acquisition minutes. If Ethan heard her voice, he would ask where she was. She would lie badly, or tell him the truth. And if she told him the truth, he would come. He would confront Victor. He would demand answers. He would try to put himself between Sophie and the danger because that was the only direction his instincts knew how to move. 15 years earlier, Ethan had stood beneath an awning and refused to leave a frightened child alone. Now Sophie understood the cost of being the person who stayed. Sometimes protecting someone did not look like standing beside them. Sometimes it looked like letting them believe they were alone for one more night. She whispered into the empty room, I'm sorry, Dad. Then she packed the original trust into the old leather case Maggie had given her when she passed the bar. Schedule C went into a sealed evidence sleeve. The founder's statement went behind it. Certified annual renewals, Noah's audit logs, Victor's payment records, Whitmore ownership documents, private transaction minutes, the authenticated recording, one piece after another. Not a miracle. Not one secret document capable of solving everything. Layers, each fact supporting the one beneath it. Exactly the kind of case Sophie had been trained to build. At 3:40 the next morning, she drove toward Atlanta. Rain followed her north. By sunrise, Victor Langford was sitting behind a courtroom table, believing the most dangerous witness in the case had chosen not to appear. Celeste Whitmore sat behind him with the calm expression of a woman who thought silence had already been purchased. Ethan sat across the aisle with a temporary attorney, incomplete documents, and no idea where his daughter was. Sophie parked 2 blocks from the courthouse. She checked the leather case one final time. Then she reached into her purse. Her fingers touched the old brass key. For a few seconds, she held it in her palm. The metal was worn smooth now, a lock from a house that no longer used the same door. A key that opened nothing, and somehow still meant everything. Sophie closed her fingers around it. Then she stepped into the rain and walked toward the courthouse. By the time Sophie reached the courthouse steps, the rain had soaked the shoulders of her coat. She did not run. Running would not change the evidence inside the leather case. Running would not give Ethan back the 3 days she had disappeared. Running would not make Victor Langford less dangerous. So she climbed the steps one at a time. Inside the courtroom, Richard Vale stood before Judge Eleanor Mercer with the comfortable posture of a man who believed the difficult part was already over. Behind him, a large screen showed transfers connected to the Cole Founders Trust. At the defense table, Ethan sat beside an attorney who had been brought into the case less than 48 hours earlier. The lawyer had done what he could. It was not enough. Vale turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Cole, you established a trust bearing your adopted daughter's name." Ethan looked at him. "Yes." "And assets connected to Cole Atlantic entered that trust. Founding shares." Vale smiled slightly. "Assets." Ethan's attorney stood. "Counsel is deliberately removing context." Judge Mercer looked over her glasses. "Then provide the context." The attorney paused. He had copies, not originals, no Schedule C, no complete filing history, no explanation for why the archive had been altered. Across the aisle, Victor watched quietly. Celeste sat behind him. Her hands rested in her lap. Vale returned to the screen. "The court does not need a sentimental explanation for these transfers. It needs documentary proof that Mr. Cole was entitled to make them." Judge Mercer turned toward the defense. "Do you have that proof?" Ethan's attorney looked at the files in front of him. "We have evidence that the trust was created lawfully." "That was not my question." The room became still. Judge Mercer continued. "I am considering whether to temporarily suspend Mr. Cole's voting authority while this dispute is investigated." Ethan felt Claire's hand touch his shoulder from the row behind him. Noah sat beside her. His jaw was tight. Maggie stared at the courtroom doors. Ethan did not. He had stopped expecting them to open. Judge Mercer reached for her pen. Then the doors opened. The sound was not dramatic, just wood moving over old carpet, but every head turned. Sophie walked in carrying the leather case. Rain still darkened the fabric of her coat. Noah stood before Claire pulled him gently back into his seat. Ethan did not move. For a second, Sophie was 9 again. Wet hair, yellow jacket, purple backpack. Then she was 24, an attorney, standing beneath the lights of a courtroom. Sophie approached the clerk. "My name is Sophie Cole. I am the designated protector of the Cole Founders Trust. I request permission to submit emergency evidence relevant to the court's consideration." Richard Vale was already standing. "Objection." Judge Mercer looked at him. "On what basis?" "Ms. Cole is the defendant's daughter. She is also a central figure in the disputed trust. Her appearance as counsel creates obvious concerns." Sophie turned toward him. "I am not appearing as trial counsel." Vale stopped. Sophie placed a document on the clerk's table. "I am appearing in my legal capacity as trust protector and custodian of records relevant to that capacity. Defense counsel will handle argument." Judge Mercer took the document. "Your appointment is contingent upon qualification." "It was." "And you are qualified." Sophie handed over her bar credentials and the trust succession certificate. Judge Mercer read them. Vale tried again. "This is highly unusual." Judge Mercer looked up. Unusual is not the same as improper. Then she looked at Sophie. You may proceed with foundation. Sophie opened the leather case. Ethan watched her hands. Steady, not even a tremor. She removed the complete trust and placed it on the document camera. The first page appeared on the courtroom screen. Vale's expression changed, only slightly, but Sophie saw it. This is the original executed Cole Founders Trust, she said, not the incomplete copy submitted with the complaint. Vale stood. We dispute that characterization. Sophie nodded. Then we can compare them. She turned to page 42. A sentence referenced Schedule C. Sophie asked the clerk to display the plaintiff's version beside hers. The plaintiff's copy ended without the schedule. Sophie opened the original. Schedule C appeared. Protective Voting Authority. A murmur moved through the gallery. Victor leaned toward Vale. Vale ignored him. Sophie spoke calmly. The plaintiffs have repeatedly described this trust as a private vehicle created to enrich me. She looked at Judge Mercer. I have never received a personal distribution from it. Vale stood. Self-serving. Judge Mercer held up one hand. She is laying foundation. You will have your opportunity. Sophie continued. The trust holds a portion of Ethan Cole's founding voting shares. It does not hold corporate operating funds for my personal use. It was created before the current dispute and before Whitmore Capital expressed interest in acquiring the company. Judge Mercer looked at the document. Why is your name associated with it? Because I became eligible to serve as protector after reaching adulthood and obtaining the required professional qualifications. Can the protector withdraw assets? No. Can the protector spend trust assets personally? No. Can the protector transfer them to herself? No. Vale looked toward Victor. Victor's confidence had begun to thin. Sophie reached back into the case. The incomplete document is not the only issue. She produced Noah's audit logs. Vale stood again. Your Honor, we have had no opportunity to authenticate these technical records. Noah rose from the gallery. Sophie looked at him for the first time. Her brother gave the smallest nod. Defense counsel called Noah to establish the records. He explained the company's document management system, every access event, every replacement, every archived backup. Judge Mercer listened. Vale attacked the system. Mr. Cole, your father owns the company? Yes. Your sister is presenting these records? Yes. And you expect us to believe neither of you has altered them? Noah remained calm. No. Vale looked surprised. Noah continued. I expect you to compare them with the independent backup stored by our external security provider. Defense counsel handed the certification to the clerk. Vale's face tightened. Noah explained that the complete trust file once contained more pages. Victor Langford accessed it repeatedly. Hours after his final access, the central version was replaced with the incomplete document later used in the lawsuit. Vale turned toward him. Can you prove Mr. Langford personally removed Schedule C? No. Victor relaxed slightly. Noah looked toward Sophie. Sophie removed another document. That is why we did not stop there. Maggie Hayes was called next. She walked to the witness stand with a folder tucked against her chest. Vale asked how long she had worked for Ethan. 19 years. And you consider him a friend? Yes. Then your loyalty is obvious. Maggie looked at him. My loyalty has nothing to do with whether a filing exists. She opened the folder. Annual trust renewals, board disclosures, distribution records. Victor's office appeared on them repeatedly. Defense counsel asked the obvious question. Was this trust hidden from the board? No. Was Mr. Langford's office informed of its continued existence? Every year. Did you personally distribute those records? Yes. Vale approached. You expect this court to accept your memory after 19 years? Maggie looked down at the stack. No. Then back at him. That is why I brought receipts. A few people in the gallery smiled. Judge Mercer did not. But something close to approval moved through her expression. The next document was Ethan's founder statement. Vale objected immediately. A sentimental letter has no legal force. Sophie answered before defense counsel could. By itself, no? Vale looked toward her. Sophie continued. The statement was incorporated into the trust as evidence of purpose for interpreting provisions related to changes of control. We are not offering a motion in place of law. Judge Mercer nodded. Proceed. Sophie read one line. A company should never become powerful enough to forget the people who made it possible. Ethan lowered his eyes. He remembered writing it at the kitchen table while Sophie studied for an exam in the next room. Sophie did not read the personal note. Not yet. She returned to the evidence. The bank transfer came next. A consulting payment to a company controlled by Victor. The payer led through layers of ownership until it reached Whitmore Capital. The payment date appeared on the screen. The same day the shareholder action was authorized. Judge Mercer looked at Victor. Mr. Langford, were you being compensated by Whitmore Capital while participating in board decisions regarding its acquisition proposal? Victor leaned toward his attorney. Vale stood. My client will respond if called appropriately. Judge Mercer's voice cooled. I did not ask counsel. Victor swallowed. The payment related to advisory work. What work? Strategic consulting. For whom? Whitmore-related entities. While you were chairman of Coal Atlantic. Victor hesitated. Yes. Judge Mercer wrote something down. Celeste's posture changed. For the first time, she looked toward the exit. Sophie opened another file. Private transaction minutes, the proposed sale. 51% control, a purchase price far below the latest independent valuation, then the restructuring model. Rail assets sold separately, cold storage divided, regional routes closed, workforce reduction. Ethan stared at the numbers, not the sale price, the employees. More than 2,000 positions marked for elimination or review. He looked back at Marcus sitting in the gallery. Marcus was already looking at him. Celeste whispered something to Vale. Vale turned toward Sophie. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. He was no longer dismissive. He was hunting. Ms. Cole, you have presented a remarkable amount of material. Sophie said nothing. You are deeply personally connected to the defendant. Yes. He adopted you. Yes. He paid for your education. Yes. He sold an asset to pay your tuition. Sophie looked at Ethan. The first truck he ever bought. Vale stepped closer. He gave you a home. Yes. A name. Yes. A career. No. Vale paused. Sophie continued. He gave me the opportunity to build one. Vale smiled. Very moving, but that is precisely my point. He turned toward the judge. How can this witness possibly be objective? Then back to Sophie. You owe Ethan Cole everything. Don't you? The courtroom fell silent. Ethan shifted in his chair. Claire touched his arm. Sophie looked at Vale. When I was 9 years old, I believed kindness created debt. Vale waited. Sophie continued. I learned differently. You deny that you are grateful. No. Then gratitude affects you. Of course it does. Vale smiled. Thank you. But gratitude did not alter the archive. His smile disappeared. Sophie pointed toward the first screen. Gratitude did not remove Schedule C. Another document appeared. It did not send Mr. Langford money. Another. It did not create the acquisition plan. She looked at Celeste. And it did not decide how many employees would lose their jobs after the sale. Vale's jaw tightened. Sophie lowered her voice. There is a difference between a debt and a promise. No one moved. A debt is something you repay because you want to be free of it. She looked at Ethan. A promise is something you keep because you have decided who you are. Ethan's eyes filled. Sophie turned back toward Vale. My father never asked me to repay him. Vale answered quietly. Yet you disappeared for 3 days while he faced the most serious crisis of his life. Ethan looked up. Sophie knew exactly why Vale had asked. He thought he had found the wound. He did not realize he had opened the final door. Yes, Sophie said. Vale stepped closer. Your office could not locate you. Correct. Your father could not reach you. Correct. You met with a representative connected to Whitmore Capital during that period. Celeste's head snapped toward Vale. Sophie saw panic move across her face. Vale did not. He continued. Isn't it true that you were considering an offer from interest connected to the company trying to acquire Coal Atlantic? Sophie waited 1 second, then another. I considered what they wanted me to hear. Vale frowned. Sophie opened the leather case once more. And I preserved it, Celeste whispered sharply to her attorney. Too late. Defense counsel moved to admit the recording after presenting the preservation records and legal foundation. Vale objected. Judge Mercer reviewed the materials, then allowed the audio to be played provisionally. Thomas Wynn's voice filled the courtroom. No one is asking you to lie. Sophie heard her own recorded voice. Then what are you asking me to do? Nothing. A pause. That is the point. The room became completely still. The recording continued. No one needs you to betray your father, Sophie asked. You only need me to stay silent. Thomas answered. Exactly. Ethan closed his eyes. Those 3 days, every unanswered call, every fear. All at once he understood them differently. Sophie had not been running away. She had been walking deeper into the danger than any of them knew. The recording ended. Judge Mercer looked toward Celeste. Was Mr. Wynn acting on behalf of Whitmore Capital? Celeste's attorney stood. We cannot stipulate to that. Sophie produced corporate communications connecting Wynn to Whitmore's transaction team. Judge Mercer read them slowly, then looked across the room. I suggest everyone choose their next words very carefully. No one spoke. Sophie returned to Schedule C. She did not describe it as magic. She did not describe it as Ethan predicting the future. She walked through the language carefully. 3 conditions. A serious breach of fiduciary duty, manipulation or concealment of company records. A hostile change of control connected to that conduct. One by one, she connected the evidence. Victor's undisclosed compensation, the altered archive, the acquisition plan, the attempt to silence Sophie. Then she reached the final provision. When those conditions existed, the trust protector could temporarily exercise reserved voting authority while a court reviewed the conduct. Vale objected. He argued the clause had not been properly renewed. Maggie's annual filings answered him. He argued Sophie was not qualified when the trust was created. The succession certificate answered him. He argued the original might have been assembled after the dispute. The notarized archival records answered him. Every objection met another document. Not because Sophie had found one perfect piece of evidence, because she had kept reading. Judge Mercer called a recess. Ethan remained seated. Sophie stood across the courtroom. For a moment they looked at each other. Ethan began to rise. Sophie shook her head slightly. Not yet. He sat back down. 40 minutes later, Judge Mercer returned. Everyone stood. She began with the narrow issue before her. The court was not deciding final criminal liability. It was not resolving every corporate claim. It was deciding whether Ethan's voting authority should be suspended and whether the proposed acquisition could continue. Judge Mercer looked at Victor. The evidence presently before this court raises substantial concerns regarding undisclosed financial conflicts. Then at Celeste. Possible interference with a material witness, then toward the document screen. And manipulation or concealment of corporate records. She looked at Ethan. The request to suspend Mr. Cole's voting authority is denied. A breath moved through the room. Noah closed his eyes. Claire covered her mouth. Judge Mercer continued. Any proposed transfer of control to Whitmore Capital is temporarily restrained. Victor's face went pale. Mr. Langford is prohibited from participating in board decisions related to the disputed transaction pending further review. Then she looked at Sophie. The court provisionally recognizes the protector authority established under Schedule C for the limited purpose described in the trust and subject to continuing judicial supervision. Sophie finally exhaled. Judge Mercer closed the file. Evidence concerning undisclosed payments, document manipulation, and possible witness interference will be referred to the appropriate authorities. Celeste stood. Her attorney caught her arm. Judge Mercer saw it. Ms. Whitmore. Celeste stopped. I recommend you remain available. The gavel came down. For several seconds, Ethan did not move. $900 million of assets had not been saved in that moment. Not really. What had been saved was time, control, the chance to fight in daylight, and for Ethan, something far more personal. His daughter had come back. The hallway outside the courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters waited downstairs. Attorneys moved into side rooms. Noah was immediately surrounded by the company's legal team. Claire found Ethan near a marble window. "You should go to her." He looked down the corridor. Sophie stood alone near the far end, closing the leather case. Ethan walked toward her. She heard his footsteps. Neither spoke until he reached her. Then Ethan said, "I thought you were gone." Sophie looked at him. "You were late once." He frowned. "What, when I was 10? Recognition slowly appeared. The porch. 30 minutes. My phone died. I packed my bag." Ethan looked down. Sophie smiled faintly. "You sat beside me until I believed you." He looked at her again. "I needed you to believe me for 3 days. I didn't know what I was supposed to believe. I know. You could have called. I almost did." "Why didn't you?" Sophie looked toward the courtroom doors. "Because you would have come after me." "Of course I would have." "Exactly." Ethan shook his head. "That is not a reason." "It was to me." "Sophie." She stepped closer. "You spent my whole childhood standing between me and anything that scared me." Her voice softened. "I wanted one turn." Ethan looked at her for a long time, then said the thing that had been sitting inside him since the lawsuit began. "I did not adopt you so you would save me someday." Sophie nodded. "I know. You don't owe me for that house." "I know. Or school. I know. Or my name." Her eyes filled. "I know, Dad." The word broke something open in him. He looked away. Sophie reached into her purse, then placed the old brass key in his hand. Ethan stared at it. "You kept this? 15 years. The lock changed. I know. Then why carry it?" Sophie looked through the courthouse windows at the rain. "Because it was the first thing anyone ever gave me that meant I was allowed to come back." Ethan closed his fingers around it. Sophie continued, "You gave me a key when I had no home." She glanced toward the courtroom. "Today I gave you back the right to keep yours." Ethan laughed softly through tears he no longer bothered hiding. "That company is not my home." "No." Sophie looked at him. "But the people are." Weeks became months. Victor was removed from the board while investigations continued. Whitmore Capital abandoned the acquisition. Coal Atlantic established new independent oversight. Maggie was placed in charge of corporate records and compliance. Noah took formal responsibility for fleet technology and digital security. Sophie agreed to serve as independent counsel to the Founders Trust, only after imposing one condition. If the document says no family does not get to change the answer. Ethan smiled. Good. Claire found him one evening at the Savannah riverfront after another long day of restructuring meetings. He was sitting on a bench watching cargo ships move through the dark water. She sat beside him. "You look tired." "I am." "Poor billionaire. Almost billionaire. Tragic." He smiled. After a while, Ethan said, "I spent 15 years building something because I was afraid of losing everything again." Claire looked toward him. "Did it work?" He watched Sophie and Noah across the walkway arguing over where to eat. "No." Claire smiled. "No, I built the wrong thing first." "What was the right thing?" Ethan looked at his children. "That." Claire slipped her hand into his. Ethan did not say anything else. He did not need to. Months later, on a clear Savannah morning, Ethan stood at the original port yard where Coal Harbor Logistics had once owned 3 exhausted trucks. Now locomotives moved beyond rows of containers. Refrigerated trailers lined the loading lanes. Workers crossed the yard wearing Coal Atlantic uniforms. Sophie joined him near the fence. Ethan wore his old canvas jacket, the same one Claire had tried to throw away twice. Sophie looked at it. "You own other clothes." "So I am told." She slipped one hand into her coat pocket. "Hold out your hand." Ethan laughed. "That sounds familiar." "Your hand." He opened it. She placed the brass key in his palm. Again. Ethan looked at her. "I thought you already gave this back." "I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because it isn't yours." He frowned. "Whose is it?" "Mine." "Then why put it in my hand?" Sophie looked across the yard. "To remind you." "Of what?" She started walking toward the administration building. Ethan called after her. "Sophie." She turned. You gave me a key when I had nowhere to go." A small smile touched her face. "Keep building places people can come back to." Then she continued across the yard. Ethan looked at the old key. 15 years earlier, it had opened the door of a small rented house. Now it opened nothing at all. And somehow, standing there beneath the Georgia sun, Ethan understood that it had never really been about the lock. Noah shouted his name from the loading bay. Claire waited near the office doors. Sophie was already halfway there. Ethan slipped the key into the pocket of his old canvas jacket and followed them.